Ladies and gentlemen, today we're gonna have a look at Robert Schumann and more specifically to his so-called tempo rubato. Now, I guess you are all familiar with the name Robert Schumann, right? So I don't have to introduce this man to you. And I don't think that you're unfamiliar with tempo rubato, the art, so to say, to speed up or to slow down in music. Many musicians today would call that musicality, and they cannot see a future in music where you would just play strictly in time. Why is it necessary in the classical music today? Well, the answer to that is a little bit more complex than that. We're going to dive into all of that, but before we do that, in case you watch this before the 2nd of July, check out our Kickstarter of Chopin, because we matched the threshold as this production is going to be produced. Very exciting to do that, and you want to have your name into the booklet of these productions, tying your name to these, I would say, historical recordings, because whatever you think about our solution to the metronome problem, the WBMP as we call it, the whole beat metronome practice, you take 2 takes for 1, whatever you think about it is a unique effort. It's a unique thing that we are doing by playing that music really according to the metronome marks, having no excuse at all. Not saying that Beethoven's metronome was broken or he dropped the machine or whatever, or that we are just supposed to look at a number under the weight, or that Chopin didn't care about metronome marks while his metronome never left the piano, as his students say. And then people find all kinds of excuses to really keep these metronome marks there, never talk about them, but just leave them there in order when they get questions why they play so fast, they say, yeah, can you not read the metronome mark? But then when you point out the fact that actually 90%, 80%, I don't know, is not played according to these metronome marks, but slower till much slower, with a lot of tempo rubato, and now you get my point why it's so important today. Well, then they're all like have excuses like, okay, but it's this or that, or that we don't have the right type of piano, whatever. We have no such excuses necessary. We just play everything according to those metronome marks. And you like the recordings or not, many people do, by the way, but it's an historical effort. And so you want to have your name really attached to the booklet. I would like to take you to an interview that this person, this scholar, this Dr. Mikashuk gave to Henle Verlag. This is one of the most knowledgeable people that live on this planet for that music of Schumann and Mendelssohn and that period. So this is all about the metronome marks that are faultily printed or whatever. Mikashuk, to his credit, says no, none of that. All the metronome marks we have are correct. This metronome functioned. Clara Schumann said later, yeah, that his metronome was not correct, but she withdrew that statement. And rightfully so. I mean, how would it be possible? A metronome functions, and when it functions, then it functions correctly because it's just a spring mechanism that can go wrong. But then you don't have a metronome anymore. The machine doesn't work. You have 2 weights and that's it. At the end here, he says, tempo is not equal to speed. In music, tempo has the quality of flexibility. The quality of flexibility, which is true. I mean, you can do that. It has a certain charm. But it's still something that quite decisively determines the character of the piece. Also true. So I do understand correctly that you appeal to the musician's take to take Schumann's origin metronome mark seriously. That's the question. Now the answer, yes, I urgently suggest taking a closer look. Not by letting the metronome tick while one plays. I wonder why. Maybe it's too fast. But by attempting to play the pieces as close as possible in the tempo intended by Schumann. Why would you not let the metronome tick, but just have the intention to do that? Well, if you read something like that, and all of you watching this video right now, and if you're new here, welcome. But you will become also one of those persons that could just laser beam through these sentences. In these 2 sentences, you have to pay a closer look to the metronome marks, not by having the metronome tick, by developing the attention to be close to Schumann. Close to Schumann means slower. And why is that? Because he is acknowledging that the metronome marks do not make sense. And by the way, we have covered maybe, or we didn't, Alfred Brendel, the late Alfred Brendel right now. Unfortunately, he wrote articles on the Kinderscenen and by saying it doesn't add up, it doesn't make any sense. That generation has now literally died because today scholars or musicians, they have no possibility anymore to say that the metronome marks, they don't understand it. Maybe our work here has to do something with that because guess what? If the metronome marks are problematic, what you can read here between the lines, then there is no other solution than the WBMP. You can only use the metronome in two ways. Single beat, 1 tick equals the note value, or whole beat, 2 clicks equal the note value duration, just like a pendulum, 1 and 2 and so on. So that's what's actually here in this sentence, or in these two sentences. And then he says, a point that appears important to me is that also Schumann noted several ritardandi. How can you really become slower if your basic tempo is already too slow? That's, of course, a non-argument. We are going to check another article now, an interview that he did later, so 2021. The author here points to to a lecture that he gave, or it is actually a documentary. I didn't find it on the Northwest German radio, the Norddeutsche Rundfunk, in 2000. I don't know. There is a date here, but at the end, he is summarizing here what Mikashuk had to say, and it ties into this, what we just read, but it goes more into specifics, and that's interesting. 2021, now we're talking, there cannot be a mistake. There could not have been a misunderstanding about the reference time values for the metronome marks. Guys, they're talking about the WBMP here. 2021, I was already making videos about this topic, so the pressure is there, which I really enjoy. I mean, it should. It is not about provoking people. There is no controversy, whatever, that I want to just initiate. But it's true that when something doesn't work and the academic world doesn't solve it, but they see the solution that's clearly from like Mikashuk, must have thought about it or got the suggestion, but he said there's no deny that it's not possible. Well, I would like to know why. He gives this like a pseudo solution, which is not really a solution. But anyways, he continues after saying that, demonstrating this with the metronome marks that Clara Schumann gave in a much later instructive edition of the Kinderszene. So Clara Schumann, not following Robert Schumann's metronomization, there is a fascinating back and forth between them, between her and Brahms. But that's for another time. He also supports this by citing the use Schumann made of ritardandi in several pieces. That's the same thing that he said in the older interview. A performance directive that would not have been effective with a much lower tempo. Well, that's nonsense, of course. It just depends on balance and how you frame it. But then he said, in conclusion, he argues, taking these markings very seriously, mentioning that the contemporary tendency was overall towards playing Schumann's character pieces much more fluently than is customary today. This is a very interesting sentence. Let's see what Schumann has to say about this himself. So here's a book, or actually a small book, is his advice to young musicians. Play strictly in time. The playing of many a virtuoso resembles the walk of an intoxicated person. Do not take such as your model. Yeah, what do you make of that? Yeah, it's only when you practice. Well, according to Mikashuk, you shouldn't practice with the metronome, right? It's not, you should not do it. Schumann says play strictly in time, but if you have no idea, I mean, how are you gonna check on yourself? Well, then people say, yeah, but it's obviously not when the performer is just practicing. Well, he doesn't say that. He literally said the playing of many a virtuoso resembles the walk of an intoxicated person. I can imagine that Robert Schumann listened to these performances not while these people were practicing, but while these people were playing concerts. So the finished product, so to say. He said, don't take that as an example. Well, he didn't win that battle because the second half of the 19th century developed in this like overly use of tempo rubato for reasons, of course, partly because the tempos were too fast. That's the main reason today. But in those days, it's of course a change of musical taste. That's just what they liked. But it's not how this music was written. You have voices in the later 19th century that actually could shed a light on that. And we have one of these composers, Edvard Grieg is one of those. This is just an excerpt of how I keep notes of the things that I'm reading. So you have the quote here, and then I have the reference to the book in which I read that. That's an abbreviation, of course. Then some keywords so that I can find these quotes back if I needed them, and then the page numbers, of course. That should be another page number. That's a mistake anyways. 1907. So we are here at the very last year, I think, even of Edvard Grieg. And Edvard Grieg, by the way, he belonged to the Leipzig school. The Schumann, Mendelssohn, Brahms, even if you want. You could also say that Chopin also belonged to that school. Not directly, of course, but they shared the same principles. This strictness of playing. He says the Wagnerite art, of course, he admired Wagner. He was there when Wagner's opera house, Bayreuth, was opened. So Wagner was caught in music. But yeah, this is about how people played Schumann's music in 1907. And remember, go on the channel as well. We made a video about William Mason. You should see that. Anyways, back to Grieg. He says, Wagner's art, including that of Bülow, has had such a bad influence on contemporary musicians that they feel all music as Wagneritisch, deliberately do not say Wagnerian, in the sense that they cannot create or perform so much as 4 measures in the same tempo. Fluctuality, right? Fluently. Tempo rubato, that's our modern way of tempo rubato. Such was not Schumann's opinion, however. Well, that we just read, right? Now, so far as piano music is concerned, everything has to be exaggerated, and the quote goes on, and I'm just reading it because everything you need to know is here in this quote. So far as piano music is concerned, everything has to be exaggerated thanks to the above-mentioned school, with Bülow leading the way. When the first and to some extent the second movement of Schumann's A minor concerto is performed like it was yesterday, the noble master must turn over in his grave. Allegro became presto. Well, that surprises us, right? Just go and check those metronome marks. I mean, how is it possible? The Schumann metronomization is like impossible for us. Yeah, no. Allegro became presto. So if Grieg was not aware of anything with Schumann, well, he heard Clara Schumann in the 50s even with Schumann's music. So he was there in Leipzig. He had lessons with Moscheles. I mean, he was there just right after Mendelssohn and Schumann. Mendelssohn Mendelssohn 1847, Schumann a little bit later, 1856, if I'm not mistaken. But he was there in that period, like just after that. And so he is saying that Schumann Allegro movement, they played it as a presto. Yeah, but we cannot play that Allegro movement fast enough, according to the metronome marks. So what do you say of that? That they played even prestissimo? So much faster than what we actually can imagine to do. It doesn't make any sense. Grieg had a whole beat performance in his mind. Otherwise, this doesn't make any sense. A passage that was supposed to be calm in character became adagio. So this like contrast of like slow movements slower, fast movements faster. Same thing as Wagner was accused of. The wonderful harmonies in the ensemble could scarcely be heard as the orchestra rushed through them. If you go through my notation code, our listening guide, that's what you should go to. With the Beethoven symphonies, Alberto and I stress that point over and over again. When you play Beethoven so fast, what is disappearing? It's the harmonic magnitude of the work. You have no time to absorb that. And then he says, this is a crime. Wow. The tradition here is not in doubt. Schumann died in 1857. It's 1856, therefore I was mixing up the dates. I came to Leipzig in 1858, and a few months after my arrival, I heard the bewitched Clara Schumann play the concerto, and each tempo remains indelibly impressed on my soul. Well, you can doubt about that fact because it's 50 years later, but what he could do is check the metronome mark. So anyways, just to close this video, let's listen to a random performance of Schumann Kinderszene. I literally typed in Schumann Kinderszene and Tiffany Pun's recording came up, and well, she can play the piano, right? And by any stretch of the imagination, just take any performance you want, any performance, they all copy each other. And they have the same way of dealing with the score. Well, this is a metronome mark by Schumann, and I chose the slowest ones. If you go Tiffany Pun, just listen to a recording. The first one, she plays almost in whole beat. So she doesn't care about the metronome marks, And that's one of the things people would say, like, yeah, but obviously she plays too slow. No, we play that music still as we are. There is no attitude here of showing off. This is a piece that pianists feel safe to play as they feel it, because you don't have to show your virtuosity. You don't have to prove that you're a virtuoso if you play this music. So, eighth note 138. Now, I just play a few bars here, not too long, but just try to type the tempo. Tiffany Pun plays this in a tempo of about 98. So we come from 138. Try to tap the tempo. So the trick what she's doing is like da dan di dan di da di da di da di da di da 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 di da di da di di da di da di da da da. So back to Mikashuk. I mean, they played Schumann's character pieces with much more fluently than is customary today. Even more than this, there is literally no tempo anymore here. And now granted, if you go to Karl Czerny, again, I think Karl Czerny is another school. And I'm not so sure that Czerny influenced Mikashuk, Robert Schumann so much in this. They really wanted to have a strict tempo, but even Karl Czerny says, when you do this, it should be unnoticeable to the listener. So very, very subtle. Let's go to the Traumerei. That's just a score I found on IMSLP. Very interesting, right? Quarter note 100. It's like the teacher or the owner of this score just marked it with 8 notes. That's, of course, the entire whole beat concept. But just listen to what she's doing. Here is a ritardando, but for the rest, there is one constant fluctuation of tempo. There's no such thing as a stable tempo. And then the first note, everybody plays an 8th note. Just this first bar, play it again if you want. Just try to figure out what tempo this is. It's like a rhetorical way of producing these notes. And I'm not saying that this is not beautiful. You can like that. The only thing that we are trying to do here is to figure out what Schumann had in mind. But when Schumann says, like, don't follow the virtuoso players, they play like intoxicated persons, then this is an example of that. Where is your pulse? For the 19th century, it was so important, I mean, especially the first half, to have that pulse in your mind. Karl Czerny is also describing that. Don't slow down for the necessity of technical reasons or whatever. Play the piece in one pulse, and if you do something, it should be unnoticeable to the audience. Why is that? Once you get this feeling of following the pulse, it's very addictive. And it's like I said, in jazz music and pop music and rock music, whatever. I'm not familiar with all these kinds of formats, but you know what I mean. From the moment a drummer is there or a bass guitarist, they just keep everything in tempo, and everything revolves around that. Imagine that would go up and that would go down. I mean, we do that with classical music, and we created this by playing this like over and over and over and over again. And don't get me wrong, you cannot play Schumann enough. But it's just ingrained in our common ears, almost in our musical DNA. We expect that. When you listen to Alberto playing, and also our symphonies, they're played strictly in time. And first it can be a shock, but after a while it's addictive. Why? Because you can, first of all, the performance go on the background. It's not how we do anything. The nuances are really there, and you have much less playground, much less room to play around with these things. So it's very difficult. Everything is there, what needs to be there. But after a while, you will not be able to listen to many other performances of today, because you will hear that everybody's just stopping and then rushing and then stopping, adding note. For the beauty of music, And it can sound like a little bit more impressionistic. I get that, like this offbeat performances, but it's not what Mikashuk. It's the 19th century is the opposite. Even with Wagner, was not that extreme. It's not possible. It's the opposite what Mikashuk said, and that's the entire point of the video. Dum dum ting dum, ting dum ting. Again, I'm not saying it's not beautiful. Pam, ting, pam, pam, pam. That's free tempo. That's free tempo. And I have to keep in mind, she is playing almost, if not spot on, whole beat. This is closer to indeed eighth note 100 than it is to quarter note 100. There are so many aspects. If you not recreate a musical interpretation, what's an interpretation? A performance. If you not, let's rephrase it. If you want to understand the score, or if you want to read the score through the eyes of the composer, which is, by the way, impossible, you have a few metrics to reconstruct. But the most important thing is the tempo. The tempo determines everything. I've been saying that for years. Changing the tempo changes everything. And now you see that. Because if I would select faster performances, maybe not in the Kinderszene, but overall, we've covered also Trifonov with Chopin. Well, when it becomes really, really difficult, they manage to do incredible stuff. But then with Chopin, Chopin sprinkles in some insanely beautiful harmonies. And what do pianists do? They slow down because, of course, they know, they're musicians, that it is like impossible for the audience to digest that sequence of harmony that's going to come. And so suddenly there is this fluency of tempo inserted, which is absolutely not in the score. But that only happens by the choice of a wrong tempo. And of course here, the Traumerei was played almost in whole beat. I know that. But it's like this tendency, this how do you call that? This tradition almost of tempo rubato of today is so ingrained in the DNA of musicians that we apply it everywhere. And again, I'm not saying it's not beautiful, and I'm not saying you cannot enjoy that. Please, by all means, enjoy that if you really want. The thing is, if Schumann had that in mind, and it's apparently very hard for people to distinguish two things, reconstruct what the composer possibly had in mind. We just start with the tempo, but that is, of course, has huge consequences if you start from the wrong one. And just like doing what you like. People want to combine that. I like this performance. It's obviously how Schumann had it in mind. Well, it's not necessarily the case. And in fact, if that were the case with everything we heard today, that should be astonishing. That would be astonishing. That we kept something. The only thing on this planet that kept unchanged is just the performance of musical pieces. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? That's not an argument, but it can open your minds. Anyways, let me know what you think about this. Always looking forward to your opinions. And because, I mean, guys, a lot of you who follow me for a longer time, you're educated people in this. So let me know what I missed. Let me know other examples. You keep sending me also stuff through email. So that's all great. Enough topics. By the way, I might take a break in the summer with YouTube for reasons that I also want to have, a kind of introspection on the channel. I want to open that music channel. I don't know yet how I'm going to do that, how I'm going to change maybe a little bit of content on this channel. I have actually no idea. But moreover, I just want to have a little bit time off. First weeks of July will be the festival in Leuven, in which I'm playing, but also I have to teach and do some organizational stuff. And so I will be very occupied. And then I'm working on the book, and I want to have my mind free. And these YouTube videos, I'm happy, and I make them with a lot of pleasure, but they take up quite some time also in preparation. And then I have to do some editing and create a great thumbnail, because if it's not a kind of clickbaity thumbnail, click-worthy thumbnail, then the video doesn't perform at all, and so on and so on. And doing all the effort for, and. So in the summer months, you might see me a little bit less. I'm not sure how I'm going to communicate that. Maybe in the next video, if I made that decision. Very clear. Okay. And before you leave, check out Chopin. That's really worth your time checking out, and I think also your money, and you support the projects here as well. That are these things also that provide a little bit of the income together with the patrons to make me just spend so much time on all of this. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.